On to activity 3, where our purpose was to explore the equinoxes and solstices, the Earth-Sun relationships that cause them, and their significance. Here's what we did. We recorded the sun's altitude from various positions on the Earth and then graphed them. We learned about solstices, equinoxes, and Stonehenge. We spun around to show rotation and revolution, and we modeled the Earth revolving around using the globe. Some key concepts. We should know now that the sun is never directly overhead at transit unless your location is between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Twice a year, on the equinoxes, the sun is directly overhead at the equator, and the length of the day and length of night are equal, 12 hours apiece, everywhere on Earth. That includes us. Ancient cultures often had very detailed and accurate measurements of and means of tracking the motions of astronomical objects. Ancient cultures used the motions of the stars to help them track time and mark important events, and astronomical phenomena sometimes took on important religious and cultural significance. Alright. Pause and reflect. Where on Earth can sun be directly overhead? Between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn? When is the sun directly overhead at various locations? The sun never got directly overhead at the poles, probably not locally. The sun got directly overhead as viewed from the equator around the equinoxes, September 21st or March 21st. And the sun got directly overhead as viewed from the Tropic of Cancer around June 21st. And directly overhead from Tropic of Capricorn on December 21st. Better explained.
I'm Diana. You're watching Physics Girl, and I am relieved to have gotten you this footage, courtesy of my mama. This rare solar phenomenon was filmed on Kauai in Hawaii, where my childhood home is. This phenomenon happens twice a year in Hawaii if it's not cloudy, during solar noon, which is, of course, when the sun is highest in the sky, but doesn't usually fall at noon. Photos and videos taken during this time seem eerie, almost photoshopped, because there are no shadows. This is called the subsolar point, or Lahaina noon in Hawaii, and it happens when the sun is directly overhead. But here's the sad thing. It doesn't happen for any of the other 49 states in the US. Sorry. And yet, it happens at some point for 80% of the continent of Africa. Because Africa is hot as. Because 80% of Africa is between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Ever notice how the degrees of the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn match the tilt angle of the Earth? It's almost like they were defined that way. Yeah, the Tropic of Cancer is where the Sun-Earth line meets Earth during the summer solstice, which is when the sun is directly overhead at the Tropic of Cancer. Directly overhead means that line makes exactly a right angle with that spot. So in this setup, the sun would not be directly overhead for the North or South Pole. In fact, the sun can never be directly overhead for anything north of the Tropic of Cancer, or anything south of the Tropic of Capricorn, because the solstice is already when you get the maximum tilt of the northern hemisphere toward the sun. And it has this weird property. The Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn are the only places on the planet where this can happen, when it's the longest day of the year and you can have the sun directly overhead. Here's a fun aside to think about. Why doesn't the longest day of the year match the hottest day of the year? Thanks to Alex in Hawaii who snail mailed me that question. And why doesn't Lahaina noon match the longest day of the year in most places? Carry on. Okay, so 23.4 degrees north gets Lahaina noon during the summer solstice, and 23.4 degrees south gets Lahaina noon exactly 6 months later on the winter solstice. On the dates exactly between the solstices, Lahaina noon happens at the equator, so the equator gets Lahaina noon twice a year. And between those dates, Lahaina noon happens somewhere between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, and it happens twice a year. So if you're planning your Hawaii research trip, try to do it sometime near the end of May or the middle of July, and you can maybe see Lahaina noon, if it's not cloudy. Of course, you could also go to Mexico, parts of Central America, Southeast Asia, Africa, Yemen, the Philippines, Australia. But hey, Thanks for watching. Happy physicsing.
Cool. Thanks, Diana. And we'll get one more in.
I fear that most people don't know that the sun doesn't set on the same spot on the horizon every day. Because if asked, people say, well, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But it doesn't. It only rises due east and sets due west on the equinoxes, March 21st and September 21st. All the other days of the year, it is rising and setting somewhere else on the horizon. And it's systematic. It's not random. Now we look at Manhattan, which has a street grid, a perfectly rectangular street grid, except for Broadway, which cuts as it chooses through the streets and avenues. And generally we think of uptown as north and downtown as south. However, the grid itself is not oriented exactly north-south. It's rotated about 30 degrees from due north. Combine all these facts, you can ask the question, is there a day of the year where the sun sets exactly along the cross streets of Manhattan? Well, you get this alignment 2 days a year. And for New York City, in our grid, 30 degrees rotated, and all the orientation, it's May 28th and July 11th. Those two dates are sort of equispaced around the summer solstice. And, you know, you read anthropological books where they're always looking at some ancient culture. If they didn't have writing, you have to infer what they valued. And so I thought, in apocalyptic Earth, if there's nothing that survives but our street grid, what would they say of us? Surely, future anthropologists would argue that we arranged our grid to align with the sun on purpose on those days. And what could they learn about our culture? Well, what's interesting about those dates? May 28th, that's around Memorial Day. Okay, that's interesting. What's the other date? I looked this up. That's around baseball's All-Star break. Memorial Day, that's war. July 11th, All-Star game, that's baseball. So they would conclude that America was about war and baseball. In my youth, I went on a research expedition to the British Isles to study stone monuments like Stonehenge, but less celebrated and less grand and less preserved. There are tons of them, literally, because these are heavy stones. And so the concept of stones aligning with the cosmos was deep within me for a long time. And so I thought, could there be a good name for this? The city interacting with the cosmos. These alignments are not made of stone, they're made of buildings, and Manhattan is about buildings. And so I just thought of calling it Manhattan Henge. Oh, and I just got a phone call recently from the Oxford English Dictionary. And they want to put Manhattan Henge in the dictionary. I was honored that I would get the call. But even if they didn't put it in, we'd still use the word. Who cares what the dictionary says? Thousands of people flood the streets to look at Manhattan Henge.
That's it. All right. We'll pick up the rest on the next video.